all 5 of our speakers back up to the stage. So Tommy, if you're done in the bathroom stall, if you can come up back on stage. Tommy, you got a little, just in the corner of your mouth, there's a little, yeah, there you go. Alan, where are you? Alan? We've lost Alan to the bathroom stalls as well. Oh, he's getting of course, he's at the bar.
Am I here?
Yeah, Ryan, Kiffer, Jamie, everyone. Well, we can, everyone can rearrange. We can play musical chairs. You can shuffle. I don't know. Now,
Unless you don't want to sit there. I'll sit here. Sit there. I don't like that seat. There's a lot of lights. It's also bright.
who are we missing? Alan. Of course, we're missing Alan. He's in the stalls with shots in his hands. All right, are we gonna? Oh, the music's gone. What? Okay, wow. It was like I just made it happen, that music. I'm gonna stand for a bit because I'm in heels, and why wouldn't I? Weird. Okay, so across the board, this is a question for all of you, and then whoever wants to weigh in can grab the mic. Just take it away from Alan. What? And audience, audience, if you have something to say, just shout at me or raise your hand or something, and I'll run to you and you can grab this mic because we want to make sure everyone can hear. So, do you think that overall hookup apps have had a positive or negative effect on the gay community? Positive? Thumbs up? Oh, neutral. Switzerland over here. Jesus. Okay. Thumbs up?
I'm with the Swiss.
Okay, the Swiss contingent is alive and well. Audience? Okay, this is good. So is there someone in the audience who gave me a thumbs down who is willing to perhaps share their thoughts on why it's a thumbs down? Ooh. Yes, please. And first off, what is your name, sir?
Tony.
Hi, Tony. Can you tell me a bit about why you gave it a thumbs down? It's like you saw my show last night. Thumbs down. Go. Tell me a bit about why you do not believe in apps, or that they've had a negative influence.
Basically, it's just like Manhunt and all of the other ones. First of all, they actually set all of their limitations, and that creates an automatic barrier. Second of all, you could respond till the cows come home, but most of the time, people don't respond, right? So, in my favor, it's like I also prefer to actually meet people in person, right? You do actually really get a sense of what's going on with that person within the first 30 seconds, right? And it's really important. It's crucial for those of us that really aren't even like tech savvy at all, right? To actually be able to meet with people on a regular platform.
Absolutely, and I think Tony actually brings up an interesting point, which is that it's sort of app behavior, like what's become sort of the accepted norm, is that you just don't respond to people if you're not interested. But that's actually sort of like, can you imagine in a room? I just don't think it's socially acceptable if someone like comes up and says hi to you. You can sort of find a graceful way out of it, but you don't just sort of walk away. I mean, or maybe you do and you're a shitty person. But like it's just, there is sort of an interesting pattern of bad behavior that keeps getting re-emphasized. Did you want to add to that?
I just have one comment to that. One thing that doesn't happen on apps is you never message somebody and then they say, oh, thanks for your message, here's my friend 3 tiles down, he'd be more interested in you. Which is what happens in a bar, right? You meet somebody and they're like, they discreetly might say, no, I'm not interested, but here's my friend, right? That doesn't happen on apps. And so there's a more social culture around meeting partners, I think, in physical spaces, because people are not saying, here's my friend 3 tiles down, you should message him.
I'm totally going to start doing that.
Yeah, you should.
So my comment to that.
4 down and 2
It's like you
Very
can't do that on
discerning.
television, the different lockers.
Well, just a quick set. Tinder actually lets you do that. It lets you recommend a friend, which is some new features. So do that if you're ever in that situation. To the non-responding directly, I agree. It's so fucking shitty. However, I almost feel like this is agreement we make societally, culturally. Like, if you message someone in an app, like it's the point I made earlier about how online communication in general, in its essence, will be less meaningful and deep. In that, if you go say hi to someone at a bar, they are standing in front of you, so their lack of response would be deemed very fucking rude. However, if you message someone in an app, you don't know where they are. You don't know if they're at work. You don't know if they're cooking. You don't know if they're talking to their mom. You don't know if they're taking a shit. You don't know what they're doing. But
They're probably taking a shit.
they're probably taking a shit. They're bored and they're just like, okay, let's scroll through. But so I mean, I know it's shitty. I'm not denying the shittiness of like just like rudely ignoring someone. That's not a good thing to do. However, I feel like it's almost this agreement we come into with social media and apps, is that we don't know where people are like at that moment. So a lot of people do check it trivially while they're doing something else, and so
Like
it's different when
shitting, as you mentioned. You'd already said it 6 times, so I just wanted to go for 7.
Okay,
I like odd numbers.
or douching. Maybe they're ready to go out and
But
But
doing something butt related at the time is the
butt-related,
takeaway,
yeah.
I think.
right.
Aha. Okay. So for those who maybe didn't hear that at the back, Tony was saying like you're also sort of building yourself up to a letdown, because there's something about the online reality which doesn't necessarily actually have a lot to do with reality. You should see like what size I am online versus in person. So okay, but I'm curious. So thank you for sharing your thumbs down thoughts. I would like to hear some of the thumbs up thoughts from the audience. If anyone wants to share about why they think that this is actually like a good development for the community. Oh yeah, I see one over there.
Yeah, I can say like the only reason I started exploring my sexuality is once I found Grindr. I did not have the capacity to go out to the bar to meet gay people. So the first people I ever talked to was on Grindr, which sometimes led to some interesting conversations. But that, like for me, and I've spoken to a lot of my friends who were coming around at the same time, and actually like that was their first experience with the gay community was those apps, because it was somewhat a discreet way to start exploring that. Because I, social anxious me, was not going to go out and walk to the bar on my own, because that just wouldn't happen. So for a lot of people, it's the first interaction. So what happens on there is very meaningful, or like what will occur will lead to a lot of things, depending on things.
But
I think like, and for me that was positive, because I actually met some good people from that.
Just behind you, we have Eddie and Patsy from Absolutely Dragulous. Absolutely Fabulous, but Absolutely Dragulous is Carlotta's show here. Carlotta girl, looking gorgeous as Patsy, and Mina Mercury, of course, looking gorgeous as Edwina. But we're being very focused here, girls. I don't know if you noticed.
Continue, darling. Very serious, darling. Continue, darling.
So rude. Fucking drag queens. But I mean, what you're saying is sort of, we talked a bit earlier about how like visibility is political. There is something about like, there is something about an online presence that allows you to explore something before you're perhaps ready to explore that thing physically. There is something about entering a queer space for the first time when you're still in the process of figuring things out and dealing with identity politics and depending on where you are in the world. Interesting angle that we had not considered. Thank you. Okay, there was someone else. Oh, wow, it's happening. I love it. Yes. The floodgates have opened. And I'm not talking about my sweat. Go.
For myself, one of the things that I think is kind of important in this conversation that's been kind of skipped, not intentionally, but is we have a tendency as a culture and as a species to look for the answer to how we meet, how we date, how we do this, as if there's like a singular answer to it. And I find that for myself, now being mumble odd years old, that it changes according to your age and what you're looking for. I know that there are certain nights that I don't even try to go to a bar, I just want to go to a bathhouse. Mm-hmm. There are nights that I want to go to a bar because maybe something will happen, but I really want to be with some friends and I really want to get shit-faced. And then there are nights where I just want to sit at home and I want to have someone come over. I may want to date. I may want to screw around. I find different venues, and that includes apps, changes for me, like what I get out of it is always depending on what my flavor is for that particular moment. So when we have this conversation, the thing that I think is missing is the acknowledgement that we have to have is that each of these is going to be different. Like, you can't have an app that's going to give you a husband and a community and a best friend and a career goal, and you're not going to get a bar that does that either. You're going to have to find these things in different places at different times, and I do find that it does change according to age as well, because I know a lot of guys, whether it's age physically or age within the community, if you're just coming out, you're always going to try and find something that is as low impact as possible in your life, and if you're next door to a bar, you're probably going to hit that. If you're not next door to a bar, you're probably going to look for an app. I don't think either one of them is better than the other. I kind of think that it depends on what you're looking for.
They're not mutually exclusive, yeah. That it's sort of one more, apps are one more item on the buffet of how we interact as queer people, yes? Okay, there was one more hand, I believe, or if not, oh yeah, or if, and then we'll head to, I have another question for all of you beauties. Go for it, sir.
Thank you. My name is André. The last
André.
comment touched a little bit of my question was about how does age figure out in all that?
Aha, okay. Yeah, let's unpack some ageism, shall we? Let's talk about age in our community and how, I mean, and both it. Let's not only talk about apps. Let's talk about bar culture and how ageism is very interconnected with bar culture. And I think a lot of it is related. I mean, in the drag community, we're constantly trying to navigate doing drag in spaces that are more inclusive, that can allow people under 19 to access drag. So there's sort of an inherent ageism in one direction, but also in the other. Like, I mean, a lot of bars we think of as spaces for people in their 20s and 30s and maybe early 40s. Like that is some people's perception. I'm curious to hear the experience and the perceptions of the panel, and then I want to absolutely thank you for cracking this open, André, because I want to spend some time chatting about this. Who would like, Tommy?
For me, as far as age goes, I mean, I have seen people, and I've done events for people from 19, up to, I mean, I think I probably had some people in their 50s, like late 50s, early 60s, like Carlotta. Carlotta girl. But I mean, there's age does play a lot. Like it affects, you know, in apps and stuff like that a lot. I mean, for myself, I don't really care about age. That's not a big deal for me. And every different venue, I feel, on this street caters to a different age group, I would say, right? Like you've got the Junction and then the Pump Jack and then 1181 and stuff like that.
Yeah, so on apps you can explicitly curate a lot of features about who you want to meet, including age. And the bars as well. I think it's just a little bit same thing almost. And no, I appreciate that, but I think it's just a little bit less like you're actually blocking who you view on an app. Versus there might be somebody in your periphery who might be interested in you, who you might not normally be interested in, but they'll come over and talk to you, and then you're like, okay, yeah, this person's all right. And that doesn't happen when you've set parameters around who you're going to see in your app profile.
Well, and I keep looping back to this, but I think it's an important factor in this conversation. Like, is that visibility is political. So there is something about looking at a screen that actually only includes this section of a community that sort of creates an inherent understanding that is what a community looks like. And I'm not saying that people can't sort of be attracted to who they're attracted to. Like that's a whole other conversation. But there is something about being able to sort of curate who you do or do not see in a room that feels really dicey for me. And I'm curious where other people sit on that. I know we're talking about sexual health, but like the sort of mental health and community health component, I'm really passionate about. Like, we talk about bar spaces as being some of the only inherently queer spaces we have, and often that goes hand in hand with sort of with sex, with cruising, with hooking up. But how do we expect to maintain the health of a community when we're not creating opportunity for intergenerational connection. And I don't necessarily even mean sexual connection. I just mean for people to actually meet people of different generations who have a different lived experience. Like, I think that's part of sort of our queer history bloodline. Yes, I'm going to bring the mic over to you.
Well, during the 80s, we had a thing called the AIDS crisis. That left a huge gap of old people who died, and left a gap where young people couldn't be around old people and learn in terms of our community, and learn in terms of our community. So that created a problem for a while there. Now things are changing a bit. So we do actually have older gay men now who can actually relate to younger gay men, our history, just basically the way we were back then. And we do know things change and stuff. I go to bars often, and I go to bars like Junction, and I do actually run into a lot of younger people, and I'm finding nowadays they are more acceptant of older people, you know, even if they're not interested or they are interested in them. So I actually have a really good time at the Junction these days. A couple years back, there was that whole age gap, and they, oh, there's an old troll, that kind of thing, right? Oh, it happens. So I think as we start meeting personally, it's more important. I know on the apps we do actually put blinders on ourselves, and we do, and like you said, it filters the community that we're looking at. The other thing is that a digital person, as opposed to a person in face to face, you know, I was just saying that it's so easy to block someone if they say the wrong thing, whereas when you're in person, you actually have to talk that out. You know, and that's the problem, is that, you know, you sit there and look at a digital person, if they say the wrong thing to you, you block them immediately. You're not going to get the benefit of actually standing there talking, going, why did you say that, or have that conversation, right? So.
Yeah, there used to be, like with email, tone, right? So, and if you say things in capitals, you're yelling, but there maybe needs to be more of a empathetic sort of, you know, etiquette online on apps, because like you said, Peach, you're not going to turn around and walk away from someone that says, hey, well, maybe you would, but there seems to have lost that etiquette. And to raise what Tommy said, to say 19 to 50, that, and no offense, Tommy, but that kind of proves the whole point of ageism, that 50 is so old, right? It's not, right?
So as I'm going to head over to this young person who wants to speak. Now, as I'm heading there, I have a question that I want you to start sort of ruminating on, which is, and it was mentioned, I think, Tommy, you mentioned it on stage, or someone did, that that not all apps are necessarily strictly used for hookups. That, like, some people are actually finding, like, meeting people, be it relationships or lasting friendships, and so so I'm curious about when we talk about these sort of filters, where all of a sudden we're only seeing a particular section of the community, and how does that align with the possibility of making connections that aren't purely hookups, right? Like, are you only looking for friends who are exactly within your age demographic? You wanted to say something.
Hi, as someone who's only 18 years old, I find that online presence is the only way I'm actually allowed to actively connect with my community. And I don't think we really realize that as queer youth start to become more prominent, they're finding out earlier, it's because of this accessibility to media and internet. So I'm not able to go see my city's drag culture. The only way I can see my drag culture is if I watch RuPaul's Drag Race. The only way I'm able to talk to other queer people and other queer men is through online presence or community-based organizations. So I just want that to be considered as a thinking point as we're going through this.
Thank you so much. This is a really vital thing to consider, and I'm so glad that you're here, and thank you for hopping on the mic to share that. You also wanted to add to this conversation.
Yes, I did. As I've been sitting here, I've been thinking, how much we're talking about communications, how we communicate. Now, my name is Tom Dukowski, by the way. What I have noticed here tonight is this willingness to take on issues. And I'm so impressed with the panel of people here, and I'm so impressed with the way you handled with these wonderful questions. But what I have to say is that we're partaking in what we used to call a happening. this is, forgive me, but look at these women who are interpreting what we say. They are sculpting the air. And if we take a moment just to listen back and go, forget what we're hearing and go, look what they are doing. And how the hell are they doing this in natural language? How are they able to describe these experiences? And yet I watch them and I know they're doing it. So I just wanted to say to all of you, many thanks, but to our interpreters, many, many thanks.
Thank you. Please.
I think something he said, just the word happening, kind of sparked this thought in me that kind of you started this question with whether we think apps are good or bad for the community or whatnot. And I think regardless of the answer to that, which we can all have opinions on, it's happening, right? There are apps. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with that, how to navigate ourselves. During the break, somebody came up to me and Ryan and was talking about like racism on apps and how like the experience of being on an app as a person of color has a dramatic impact. And that's kind of expressed here with age too. Any number of characteristics that we kind of filter through has that. And I think how we conduct ourselves online is important. Like, it's important to how people, when they're introduced to the community, what they think of other people and how their first experiences are. If those first experiences are kind of a process of filtering through and identifying the right types of people or whatnot, I think that has an implication for our community that we have to work through and that we have to consider. And so, we're all going to have to kind of navigate how we behave ourselves online and at bars. But I think it's good to hear from all of you about discussions of what we do as a community, of how we express our identities and how we express what this community stands for, what it means, and what our values are.
Alan, do you want to continue?
Yeah, I just like a few comments based off all the great sort of responses and feedback we've heard from people. To the individual who was talking about sort of being just a bit underage from that, like that is the point. Like, I had a fake ID. That's how I found community at 16, which is when I self-identified as needing to not be alone, to not.
Which we're not necessarily condoning
Of
fake
course
IDs.
not.
You can talk to me after the show off camera. So,
however,
momentum is not signing.
However, I could get, no, I'm kidding. But it's true though, right? Like, that's what the apps have done. The apps have opened up this realm of, if you have to wait till you're 19 or 21 in America to be able to engage with your community in a space that is exclusively gay, the apps have opened up, like a 4 or 5 year window period where you can actually be able to interact with people and not have to wait till you're of a certain age to do that. I think that is so deep and meaningful. And as you mentioned, Kiffer, and sort of to segue off the ageism thing, it is something we have to talk about. And it's going to get a little heavy, but it's important. And it's like, when we think about how online interaction can be superficial or can be isolationist in its own right, this idea of gay racism, we've talked about it all the time. And, I think it's a theme with all social media, really, and Grindr is just a magnifying glass on this one aspect of a lot of human behavior. But it's easy to disregard or whatever. Like, you were talking about age filters earlier, and how that's not a thing that you can do in a face-to-face interaction. So when I think about sort of the negatives of apps, as I say that I am pro-app, one of the biggest negatives is this thing of gay racism, which I, as a person of color, have faced a lot. It affects your well-being, it affects your self-esteem, and there's this pretty popular comedian from the States. His name is Joel Kim Booster. He's Asian, and he had this amazing sentence that has not resonated, that resonated with me in a way that hasn't before, and I was like, holy shit, this is so fucking real. But he talked about how he described his upbringing, whatever, and he said, as a lot of people of color often state, that they don't realize that they are a person of color or different until they experience a moment of racism. And I find that true to my experience. I grew up in Western Canada. I spoke English. I have an English name, so I didn't really realize that I was different, apart from the gay thing, obviously, until someone was racist to me. And so the app thing, what he said, something that was so deep, which was that he didn't realize that he was a person of color until people started excluding him on the apps. And the apps, you know, when I say there's a lack of depth in communication, you can filter people out. When I think about the bar scene, you know, if people have stereotypes of people of color, if people have a stereotype of what South Asians are like, or Asians are like, or black people are like, or whatever, it's easy for them to be like, oh, they're black, they're brown, whatever, I don't want to talk to them, because of this, that, and the others, this like really ill-informed opinion about a group of people. However, if I'm at the bar and I'm talking to you, or in my active interaction with you, I'm dispelling some of these stereotypes, you're getting this active sort of re-education on what people of color are like, or what minorities are like, etc., which again, the hypocrisy of like gay people discriminating minorities, like ridiculous. But I do remember in the bar culture when I was going out or whatever, I had none of that anxiety. I was never like, oh, I'm of South Asian descent, even though I was born in Canada, da 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 da. Whereas on the apps, I am constantly reminded that even though I am born here, I am not white. Like, this is a constant reminder. That is something I only ever faced on the apps, and never going, you know, to the Odyssey or Celebrities or here or whatever, in the way that people are hesitant to be that direct with their weird racism face to face, but with the apps and that anonymity, they do feel comfortable with that, or they state preference, etc.
Like, it creates a different kind of permission to
is
be
a different
explicit
kind of
about
permission.
things that they would never be in
And
three
because
dimensions.
they're not facing the inaccuracy of their stereotype. Online, if I'm looking at a picture of a person of color, I have a gut reaction about what that means, and I feed into what I've been told growing up about certain different groups. Whereas if I see someone face to face that's a person of color, and I have this opinion, but then they break whatever bullshit stereotype someone was raised with, they immediately get to reformulate that opinion. And that is lost in the apps. And so I will give it that is one of the negatives of the app, is that people of color, or, you know, the ageism argument, so people of varying ages, we lose the ability to show that, like, those things aren't determinant of who we are as people, but the apps make it seem that way, and that's shitty.
My question, which I think has been alluded to in the conversation so far, but more pointed, is how our experience of rejection has changed or is changing in terms of, as we go through life, if we're in a public space, we experience rejection on any number of levels, especially for any number of reasons, but also if you kind of take a romantic, or if you're interested in someone romantically, the experience of this rejection in person, or in this space where you're surrounded by people, or in this space where, as you build resiliency, you learn that you have to turn to a friend or a support network, or you learn that it's not a rejection of your entire core, but these are strengths that you develop. Whereas if you're alone in an apartment in the middle of the night, and you feel like you don't even stand a chance because you can't get someone to even reply, or they lose interest, or any of these things, then how does this contribute to our mental health, to feelings of loneliness, to self-esteem, and how do people learn to then cope positively with rejection in a world where all the rules have changed?
That's an absolutely fantastic question. So a lot of my thesis is built off of an incredible woman I admire very much named Sherry Turkle. She's a professor at MIT. I encourage you all to watch her TED Talk or read her book called Alone Together. And it really gets to this very fundamental piece that has mobile technology, and maybe sex-seeking apps are just a symptom of a changing mobile tech culture, that we're exchanging quality relationships for quantity. And if we assume that we all have a limited capacity for relationships in our life, maybe not Tommy, he has a huge capacity for relationships in his life, but
I want to hear more about his huge capacity.
Yeah. Most of us have a limited capacity for relationships in our life, and we're exchanging quality relationships for a greater number of quantity. So your question about rejection is like, so are we being rejected more, or is technology just allowing us the opportunity to be rejected more? So is the proportion of the which in we're being rejected the same? We're just now having more experiences of being rejected because we're having more relationships in our lives. I think that that's all part of this piece of loneliness, is that if you don't have the quality relationships, I do this idea of balancing better quality relationships with expanding quantity of relationships.
So, speaking to like kind of the long-term influence of apps on the community, we know that when apps kind of first came onto the scene, and particularly when like websites first came onto the scene, is where it hit the community most was in places where cruising occurred. So like parks and anonymous sex venues, and those sort of places were where apps really had the biggest impact. Whereas we didn't really see a huge impact on like bars and traditional community venues in the beginning. And so I think that tells us something about like the nature of the apps, because like we said, while there is some degree of variation, like I met my partner on Tinder, you know, I've also met people on Grindr, and so like this kind of balance of like where you go for certain types of relationships is, I think, a very real thing. But there is also a general tendency for people to, when they're connecting via apps and websites, that it is a much different kind of relationship. And kind of a big argument around that, like why people think that the community has been so heavily impacted, is because of its impact on bars. It's important to note that bars haven't, while bars are an important place to meet hookups and meet partners, bars have always served a much fuller purpose than just hookups. And that's why apps didn't so heavily increase the or why apps themselves didn't attack the bars. Yes, there are things that are affecting bars, like I mentioned, the space, the cost of rent, the increasing acceptance of gay people in the general community, increasing partnering and marriage in the gay community. Those sort of things have all dramatically impacted bars, and it's why we've seen so many close. But in terms of apps themselves, it's about the nature of the relationships that we have on the average with apps is quite different. And I think that's, to Jamie's research, has really highlighted how that has affected people's mental health.
We have someone in the audience here who wants to weigh in as well. And we're in sort of the final few minutes here. So this is it, folks.
So many conversations have transpired that I think my thoughts are a little bit jumbled, so forgive me if I'm a little bit all over the place. But several points there. From the point of the conversation about rejection, about communication and all of that, I will say that for me personally, like I actually feel a lot less anxious communicating with someone in person, because my experience with apps and with online conversations is there are volumes of conversations that are lost because there is not that crucial component, which is body language, which is being face to face with someone, and to Tommy's point about being able to read if someone's interested within a very short amount of time. Whereas on an online conversation, I'm constantly gauging, like, what did you mean by those words? What did you mean by saying it like that? You know, are you actually really busy and not responding like so many times, or responding in a very kind of flippant way, versus are you actually trying to communicate to me that you are not interested? And I found that a lot more anxiety inducing, particularly as an introvert, as someone who already doesn't really have a large capacity to be able to connect with people, with many people all at once. It became a very limiting factor, because I had to sift through a lot more people to try and find someone that was actually willing to build a meaningful conversation. And then, of course, like, and then kind of breaking out of my own personal experience and my own personal opinions, I think it is also important to kind of take into account the fact that from a viewpoint of society and culture, apps are still fairly recent. Like they are still young, and yet with sort of the explosion of technology and sort of the exponential growth of this kind of globalization and communication and connection, I think we're kind of, what apps have kind of done, which is both negative and positive in its certain way, it's kind of forced people to, I think, adapt a lot faster than what we're used to and what we're kind of meant to. Whereas usually it would take a generation or two to kind of adapt to a certain kind of new fad, new occurrence. It's now being done in half a generation. It's now being done like so quickly that I think we kind of, as a society, have to reconcile with the fact that with this kind of explosion, we kind of have to adjust our paradigm as well as about how to kind of translate this into the real world, right? To the comment about it being a more accessible space for younger underage or underage people who might not, or people out in suburbs who might not have that kind of opportunity that we who live in sort of the city have. Well, I think the question more becomes then how do we not limit it to the apps? How do we expand that out from the apps? And I think sometimes that conversation is lost because we're so concentrated on the positives of what app culture can give us. So yeah, those are kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you. We have one final comment in the audience, which I said yes to. I know we're sort of, GB, I know I'm going a little over, but I feel like this is a vital conversation. And today is, of course, not the end of the conversation. This is like the beginning, and this is, it's going to continue. We don't know what that looks like, but stay tuned. Go for it.
I'm just curious if anybody on the panel can comment on using websites for zero sorting, for just the effects of people using the websites to select partners based on their status.
Yeah, so just briefly from the Momentum Health study, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but people who use apps tend to report, a higher proportion of them tend to report engaging in zero sorting. And we see that like the emergence of Grindr has actually like really made it easy to zero sort. You can not only zero sort, but you can like viral load sort, and you can now prep sort. And so you can kind of identify not this like broader range of like HIV statuses. And I think that's a big part of why apps are used, and it's how they've made sexual encounters a little bit safer for guys who are connecting with a lot of partners, because the fundamental dynamics of how in the kind of what we call sexual scripts, the scripts that you follow in a conversation, in a bar, it might not happen. It might be harder for somebody to disclose that they're HIV positive. It might be harder for somebody to say no or whatever it is that they want to do to however it is they're managing their HIV risk. But with apps, that's kind of all out front. Now, with the study I mentioned earlier that we published looking at patterns of connectedness, I think one of the more interesting findings from that, and it was featured in HIVequal.org, they covered how the stigma finding is that we found people reported higher HIV/AIDS stigma were the people who were using the apps. And so definitely there's a higher perceived consequence of having HIV, there's a higher perceived consequence of perceived discrimination against people with HIV among those people who are using apps compared to the people who don't report using apps. And so definitely we got to kind of balance both sides of that. One, people have to be able to exercise kind of their own discretion and own decision of who they want to have sex with, but also we have to realize that like deleting somebody or blocking somebody or not responding to somebody, that has an effect on that person that we should be at least kind of conscious of.
My darling panel, final thoughts?
Send nudes.
Typical. Always. And anyone? No? Alan.
I'll just say a quick thing about the last comment as well. And as you mentioned, you know, if the stats are showing that app users have higher levels of stigma, God, I feel like Grindr and stuff are gonna have to pay me at some point because I'm just gonna like praise them a little bit. So if anyone knows, then make sure they pay me. But, you know, if the stigma is higher on the apps, and I think we recognize that, like, as this new generation is growing up in a world of apps, apps are becoming this source of information for a lot of young gay men. And, One thing that Grindr and Scruff have done, they have opened up the diversity of options in some of the identifiers. For example, your HIV status. It is no longer positive or negative. I think I know some sites have up to 12, but I think Grindr and Scruff have added a few more options, but you can have, pause undetectable or negative on PrEP, et cetera, et cetera. And even if people maintain that level of ignorance, they're actually being confronted with those new labels and therefore have to ask their friends, or maybe if they feel confident enough to ask people on the apps. I've seen many people online who say, you equals you, ask me what that means, or I'm undetectable, ask me what that means, as this great local community version of educating ourselves. A new trend that Grindr did that I noticed recently is that they are now increasing their gender inclusivity
Pronouns.
to be pronouns and how you identify, and to address transphobia on the app. So yes, I do. I think in the superficial, as I say simultaneously that the apps can be very superficial, I do have to give them praise for addressing these concerns in the community. And if young gay guys are using apps as their first entryway before they physically meet people or interact with them face to face, and they are coming into it having to realize that they need to know now what pronouns are, or what gender identity is, or what pause status or neg status is, etc. That's good. And I still be critical, of course, never do that, but never forget that. But the fact that they're rising up to our concerns, our anxieties about, is gender diversity being addressed, is HIV stigma being addressed, and I think they are addressing it, and I have to say that that's a positive move.
One final thought. Thank you, Alan.
There has been a change in stigma, for sure. We're doing much better at HIV stigma. But apps are not the problem. If we want to solve HIV stigma, we need to fight against non-disclosure laws and HIV criminalization of people living with HIV. Fuck that shit. Okay? It shouldn't matter whether you have HIV or not anymore. If you're on treatment, it doesn't matter. So that's the real fight right there.
Yeah, I think that is the final thought of this conversation. We talked a lot on stage about optimism. There were a lot of optimists on the panel, and I think the turnout today and the generosity of the people who attended, just sort of taking the mic and really diving in, feels extremely optimistic about the community that we're living in. And here we are, we're all engaging. I know we're all sitting at different tables, but stick around, maybe go to a different table where you don't know people and just say hi. It seems like that kind of event. Let's, I risk even saying the following word in Carlotta's presence or Tommy's, because they'll take it elsewhere, but let's sort of cross-pollinate tables here. I know. We've or pollinate Carlotta in stall number 3. Tommy will be in number 2. Just as we're wrapping up, because it feels directly related to some of the things that have come up today, I just want to plug 2 events that I am a part of. My husband is old and barren, runs a theater company in town called ZZ Theater, and next Saturday at XY, we are remounting a show that we've been doing since 2011 called Tucked and Plucked, Vancouver's Drag Herstory live on stage, which actually we started directly related to trying to provide opportunity for us to meet generations of queers who are not of the same generation as us. I think, we learn a lot about who our family is through our grandparents or great-grandparents, if we have them. And I think it's imperative for us to find, I always talk about finding your gay grandparents, people who can actually tell you the things you need to know about how life was in a generation that you were not part of. And so Tucked and Plucked looks at sort of the beginnings of the drag movement here in Vancouver and how it has shifted over the years. So I would encourage you to attend. I also, coming up in January, I have the privilege for the 6th year to curate a project called Human Library, which ZZ Theater runs in conjunction with the Vancouver Public Library, and this year as well, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So Human Library, you go to the Vancouver Public Library and you check out a human for 20 minutes rather than a book. You choose them from a list of titles, and it's a project specifically designed for us to challenge our own ideas of otherness and difference. And so you actually get to sit down with someone, they tell you their story based on the title that you've chosen. You can ask whatever pressing questions you've always had that you've not found the appropriate place to ask them, and hopefully you leave with your mind slightly altered. It's a free program. You don't need to book in advance, just show up. If you want more information, you can visit zztheater.ca or just follow me on Facebook. Let's become Facebook friends and I will inundate you with that information. I love these community gatherings. I love when we are able to talk to one another outside of just drag show audience. Here we are all in the same room. Thank you to GB for putting all this together. Please make some noise for all of these panelists and all of you.
Wow. All right. So thank you very much. I am absolutely floored at the number of people in this room and the kind of engagement that I've seen tonight, and I'm super happy that you are all here. Just want to say quick thanks to a few people, to our lovely guests, Tommy, Jamie, Ryan, Alan, and Kiffer. You were so great. Thank you so much for telling us all your perspectives and the things that you have been working on, if you're in that, if you're doing the research thing. Just want to thank our hosts, Byron, The Junction. Thank you so much for offering the space and for providing the food. There's still lots back there, and now it's like warm stuff, so you want to eat that stuff while it's warm. So please do that. Thanks to our interpreters, Lane and Linda from ASL Interpreting Inc. Thank you so much. We couldn't do this without our community partners, Health Initiatives for Men, CBRC, Youth Co, Positive Living BC, and everyone who worked with me on this to get this event going. I'm super excited that this is something that has started happening, and I hope that this is the first of many. I'll be sending out, what's it called? One of those evaluation things, it's a research, we're a research study, so we will send out an evaluation, and I would really love to hear from you what you thought about the event, what are the things you think we should be talking about, because this is amazing. So thank you all for being here. And finally, I just want to say a massive thank you to Peach. Thank you so much for facilitating. I don't think that I could have done this at all as well as you have done this tonight. Thank you so much. And I had the opportunity to just sit back and watch while you did your thing, and it was amazing. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. And yeah, a couple final notes. If you are interested in checking out more about the Momentum Study, you can go to our website, momentumstudy.ca. On the website, you can find some of the things that we have actually released and researched. There's a lot of links on there. There's like academic papers, but there are also plain text summaries. So those are places where you can actually read about the study in like a one-pager. Read about the things that we found, read about some of the findings, because we've been collecting data for about 5 years. So all this stuff is on our website. Please check it out. I want to make sure that the research is getting to the community. So please go to the website and check that out. If you are interested in participating, stick around, meet somebody. They might have a voucher card. If you can't find one, come talk to me. I'll tell you how you can get into the study, because we want to make sure we get as many perspectives as possible, especially people who are often underrepresented in research. So please come talk to me if you're able to do that. And finally, if you've got a voucher tonight, or if you received a voucher since we started recruiting in February, you can now book your appointment online. So just go to momentumstudy.ca/book and you can get in. And what was that? Man, it took you guys long enough, man. All right. The final thing I wanted to say, we're talking about apps and everything, so everybody, I'm single, in case you're wondering. All right, finally, warm hors d'oeuvres in the back, and please enjoy the rest of your night. This is the end of the event, but we hope that you stick around and get to know some people. Have a great night, everyone.